Prime Minister is under pressure from businesses calling for a transition arrangement to allow them to trade as usual for 2 years after leaving the bloc. However, she signalled the transition would only be sealed as part of a wide deal, which isn't expected to be finalised until shortly before Brexit Day in March 2019. Let's bring in our Brexit guest this week, Professor Jonathan Portes, Senior Fellow at the UK in a Changing Europe, and Professor David Blake, who's a member of Economists for Free Trade. How are you feeling, gentlemen? How are you feeling about how much progress the UK and the EU are making over this Brexit negotiations? Well,
in my view, I mean, the problem actually at the moment is not the lack of progress in the negotiations between the UK and the EU. Its problem is the lack of progress in the negotiations between the UK and itself.
Right.
The reason that we haven't made sufficient progress on the exit bill is not that there's this huge gulf between the EU position and the UK position, because we don't actually have a UK position. The UK has not said, yes, we accept elements of this element of the bill, no, we don't accept that element of the bill. And that actually is what the EU is waiting for. But the problem is that Theresa May is not yet in a position, doesn't have agreement among her own party and cabinet, or perhaps in the country as a whole, to put a constructive offer on the table.
David, are we close then to the cabinet uniting or not? What's gonna make them united?
Well, I think we're not going to be united until we know what the final outcome is in terms of where we would like to be. You can't work out the bill for something until you know where you're heading, and we're not heading in any particular direction that allows us to determine what this bill is. And until we do that, we're going to be...
Are you blaming the EU then? Are you blaming the sequencing of the talks?
The sequencing was we are in this position now because of a predictable consequence of the sequencing. You can't work out a bill before you know how much you've used. It's like staying in a hotel overnight and then being asked to keep paying for the next day and the day after that, simply because they're turning around and says, well, we might not get anybody to come into the hotel tonight. You have to keep paying until we find a guest. And no one is going to accept those terms unless you know
but we're stuck with
what
those
the final
terms,
deal.
aren't we? We're stuck with
no,
them.
We can turn around and say, we're not going to play ball anymore. We wanted to have a good free trade deal with you. You don't want to do that. We can go to WTO terms and we can set our own tariffs and we can trade with the rest of the world, and you can abide by the tariffs that we set ourselves. We can play that game. We can do that. We should have done that from the beginning.
Do you recommend that game, Jonathan, or not?
No. I mean, yes, we could do that. But, I mean, you've had a succession of guests on, I'm sure, who've said that this would be disastrous for different industry sectors, whether that's the car manufacturing sector facing a 10% tariff every time parts cross the border, right through to service industries, which will lose access to the single market. I don't think that is realistic. I don't think anyone serious in the UK government actually thinks that is a sensible agenda to pursue, which is why we are where we are. And the consensus among external economists is that would impose significant medium and long-term costs on the UK economy.
Not serious, not realistic, damage to sectors, David. Answer all those.
The single market and the customs union is one of the most protective institutions in the world. It's very fundamentally anti-competitive. We have big businesses paying lobbyists hundreds of millions of euros a year to try and get tariffs raised, 12,500 tariffs raised, regulations. Consumers are paying 20% more for manufacturing and food than they need to. And if we brought those tariffs, if the UK brought those tariffs down, we have certain industries that we're not big at. Why are we having tariffs on, say, coffee? We don't have a coffee industry to protect. Oranges, 16% tariff on oranges, simply because Spanish producers wanted to have this degree of protection. This is not good for consumers in this country. We'd be far better off having much lower tariffs. This would help to increase productivity, and we would be able to have an increase in per capita GDP. And this is what we should be thinking of along these lines.
As I said, I mean, there is a wide consensus among economists that moving to WTO rules that would have a significant economic cost for the UK economy. Overall, I mean, of course, course, the EU imposes some tariffs which are economically damaging, pretty much every country and does of the world. But overall, what the single market gives us is a large integrated single market with no tariffs and relatively low tariffs on average outside. And the idea that prices are 20% higher, again, is just not supported by the evidence, I'm afraid. And I
the
think
discussion has just begun. Stay there. Jonathan Portes, David Blake, both stay with us in today's Brexit show. Up next, when the Brexit negotiations are over, what kind of relationship can we expect between Britain, the EU and the rest of the world? This is Bloomberg.